Well, the world is a stage. Back to Rasa Theory. Can the oldest atmosphere theory in the world help us to understand today's and our futures aesthetic manipulation? I enter the mall and the catchy but sleazy background music keeps on manipulating me throughout my stay. In the underground, I read the news with my smartphone, dwelling my eyes in a pleasant, soft-colored visual landscape, and send an SMS home. And the telephone, together with sign pads in the metro walls that share news and nice pictures from the readers, keep me slightly upbeat and accentuate that I'm in a safe, smart city. If I have the sound on, my mobile keeps on beeping pleasantly. And if I go to social media, I'm stimulated not just by friends' images on how many mushrooms they have picked, but also visuals and alluring links that take me, not coincidentally, to shaving machine pages and threads on funny-looking terriers. Today, it is not that we would have to escape to the mountains to get some peace. If you are offline there, well, mountains are fine. It is enough, though, to stay home and shut the media. Our personal territories, to the extent that they still exist, are all the time bombarded, at least if we are somewhat middle or upper class and will live a somewhat modernized, westernized life in public spaces and media platforms. Elevators play music. Our increasingly robotish cars make sounds and blink lights. Pleasant green when there is enough gasoline. And nice Star Wars type of electric sounds when you close the doors or the fanciest models. It is not like in old films when they attempt to understand what the life in the future really is. Like in Blade Runner, where an apocalyptic rain works side by side with massive, impressive moving images. Our audiovisual everyday stimulation is something else. It is an endless texture of small sounds, small lights, small images, often short in time and transparent. Not really tools that we would not recognize, but supporters of a comfort zone where we feel safe and know where we are at. We have, of course, for a long time historically, been supported by everyday design, from facades, decorations, and details of architecture, city planning, and for those who were richer, everyday design from sands to sugar bowls to tapestries. It is just that we all today receive so much more sensual and or aesthetic stimulation than ever by professional designers who, we could say, design quite a chunk of our life world. The way our everyday is designed, from ready-made food to dog breeds, clothes, teeth, and cars, has acquired a new layer of holistic public space design and digital aesthetics. It often takes care just of us. We take ourselves part in personalizing computers and smartphones, and of course choosing our malls and other public spaces, at least partly by doing aesthetic decisions. But this is only the start. I lately visited a Tata car factory in Bengaluru, where they were working on cars doing the same, so that your driving would be personalized, drivers having user IDs. And when your partner would step into the car, it would change the personalization. And the key thing today, learn from our habits and then give back a different kind of stimulation. How much do we yet understand this? At least I have noticed there are not really yet attempts to grab this theoretically. If one does not desire to think of Max Horkheimer's and Theodor Adorno's mimetic society dominated by the culture industry, or Guy Debord's Society of the Spectacle as early dystopic guesses on where we might be going. Still, there, Adorno's main attack was on the authoritarian nature of culture, and he even asked for more dialogical nature from the media. And Debord focuses on images for today's world that both feeds us and adjusts to us, is both visual and auditive. And in the future, one can guess, maybe also olfactory, absolutely more robotized, and definitely dialogical, maybe increasingly hacked into us. Media stalks us increasingly to get what we desire, not really what we really desire, of course, at what we want from our close, consumed environs. Before going into asking how we can cope with this development, it is important to note that although we often believe that we are stimulated by Anglo-American life design, maybe some Central European or Japanese, our life design is more than what most Westerners at least understand, done in China and India. China's technological leap has been incredible, but India's role, it looks, might be a bit more on the design and content side. When our everyday is artistically dramatized and intensified, many traces often lead to India. I met the man who changed Jason Statham's face on the original footage on Stuntman to a couple of films that I watched tired after work. And for fun, he moved Statham's face around the screen for a while, laughing with a latte in his hand. We were sitting deep in the incredible factory of Lebenswelt, Tata's headquarters in Bengaluru, where my host in Srishti College of Art and Design had taken me. The man was one of those millions who, in Snigdha Poonam's bestseller Dreamers, the pic is there, work on our life worlds without us realizing where our comfort comes from. Dreamers presents the growing profession of illusion building in India. When we click on different feeds where we are presented with fun dog images and tests like, which breed are you? We often somehow, maybe not intentionally, but still, think we dwell in a cultural landscape produced for us by our old, still often dominant life designers in the United States, but actually very often we are comforted by the dreamers of India, who have cleverly become aware of how to stimulate us so that we feel that our digital environment is quite Western or globally everyday, which of course often leans on Western traditions. Poonan, who worked for the Hindustan Times, was going to just write a short article about what young people in small towns want from life. She began from Ranchi, her hometown. The trip into the life of Generation Y extended into a 4-year book writing process. She found a generation that wanted to conquer the world, and they worked through digitalization. They were anxious about their future, but they worked hard to make it globally. At 2030, India will have a nearly 900 million working population, the largest in the world. And the young generation knows this. Why would not the world run by their rules? Ambitions and crushing limitations of cultural society come together in these destinies. But they work hard to affect the world. They dream big. They are the clickbaiters who create viral content for Facebook and the internet scammers who stalk you at home. They come from India. They are the ones who create digital solutions for cars and phones. Now, I teach classical Indian philosophy, Rasa Theory, theory of emotive atmospheres, to my students. And the art and design universities I have visited in India and that I know my Indian students have studied at before coming to my MA or PhD teaching seems to do the same thing. They teach Bharatas, it's the image there, and often also Abhinavagupta's, sometimes some others, ideas on the emotive atmospheres of stage art. How can we cope with this digital development and ambient development that I talked about? Not that naming India would immediately mean that it's from 1,000 to 2,000 years old debates on aesthetics would be that important anymore, but as most of these design school graduates know the Rasa theory, and as it seems that they have a key role in the production of global everyday atmospheres, it might be plausible that Rasa theory might have an effect already through art and design, like Aristotle has an impact on film production in the West. Even more, it is the first atmosphere theory in the world. In a culture that is so massively stimulating, essentially, India, it interestingly focuses on what happens on stage when one breaks everyday routines. Still, some of the basic ideas expressed in it might mirror what happens today as we are more than ever on stage. Looking at people's Facebook and Instagram feeds, it seems that quite many of us pose like film stars and do things in a Riefenstahlian manner for the camera. Especially this year has made us flat, 2D, sitting in boxes in a view that often even gets recorded on Zoom, on Teams, on Skype. We are stalked, monitored, presented audiovisually. We might be both audience and actors, and at least one major chunk of people who produce our digitally intensified life, a bit filmic, have had a look or two at Bharata or Abhinavagupta, not Böhme, Sloterdijk, or Griffero, who are the Western proponents of atmospheric theory. So why not dive into the Rasa? At some point between 500 before Christ and 500 Anno Domini, Brahmin sage and priest Bharata wrote a taxonomy of stage art. His Natya Shastra, a treatise on dramatic art, discusses gestures, acting, stage design, costumes, makeup, and masks. Everything you can imagine to belong to a dramatic performance. The Natya Shastra is also a pedagogical manual. It has been highly influential on the Indian continent, not just through its scholarly echoes, but its influence on dance. For example, all schools of modernized classical Indian dance, Bharatanatyam, Kathakali, Kathak, and Manipuri, have matured and developed in line with the manual, and the Bharatanatyam even refers to Bharata directly by name. Besides dance, the Natya Shastra has been a guiding horizon for filmmakers and other professionals in the dramatic arts. Reading the Natya Shastra, it's easy to imagine that the stage language of the spectacle in the scene Bharata worked in would have been very clearly coded. If this was not the case to the extent that the sage interpreted, as theorists working on classifications and taxonomies are sometimes too eager to compartmentalize phenomena, at least Bharata's manual, like Aristotle's Poetics, for example for French classicists, became the rulebook. The potentials for exegesis and authority-driven readings are not hard to find in the book itself. Bharata arts-plains with lists, detailed descriptions of phenomena, like the 36 movements of the eyes or the 7 movements of the eyebrows, and their corresponding meanings. He presents his text as an accurate mirror for stage art. The long thread of commentaries which followed took a more philosophical turn. The peak of this discussion being the need to turn the gaze to the scene in Kashmir in the 10th and 11th centuries. There, the Rasa theory, the most abstract part of Bharata's work, was developed into a central philosophical topic. Rasas, emotive atmospheres, were discussed in details, and reception theory, which was still very marginal in the original work, became an integral part of the discussion. Contemporary theorists easily take up with Abhinavagupta, the most argument-driven interpretation of the work, written by the Kashmiri tantric philosopher Abhinavagupta. But the line of development before him includes notable thinkers, such as Bhattalolata, Sri Shankuka, Bhattanayak, and Anadavarthana. According to Bharata and Abhinavagupta, there are 8 rasas. It means like 8 emotive atmospheres. Every play has one dominant emotive atmosphere, which had to be chosen by the author. And, as discussed, the emphasis on this increases in the later Kashmiri interpretations, understood by a qualified rasa-conscious audience. Rasa was also extended to meet other practices, for example, theories and production of poetry. Some scholars make connections to other arts like music, but for example, painting is mentioned only in one work, Sri Shankuka's theories imitation. In these cases, we are talking about normative descriptions and not about the reflections of aesthetic theory, which the philosophical community in Kashmir produced, and as such overshadow the encyclopedies of the earlier work. Rasa theory is based on the idea that the emotive atmospheric states we experience while witnessing a drama are not the same atmospheric states as we have in our everyday lives. This theory originates from the concept of psychological distance produced by aesthetic/artistic culture by high-level performers. Everyday states of mind, the bhavas, form the foundation, which is then elevated in the drama to produce something we could roughly call an aesthetic experience. Phenomenologically speaking, a reduced version of the real emotion, something represented and expressed, as Sucharita Gamlath explains. Rasa theory stimulate the viewer's memories, experiences of an actual emotive atmospheric states as a playground upon which a spiritual aesthetic elevation takes place. It is a theory of artistic sublimation based upon sensual manipulation. Sight and hearing are, according to Abhinavagupta, the strongest senses that are able to push us out from our daily experience into a parallel world, a heightened sense of being. This connects to the visions of religious experience dominating Indian philosophical discourse at the time. It would not be far-fetched to say that the description bears resemblance to John Dewey's attempt to discuss the dynamic fulfillment of experience, where our organic and intellectual resources bloom up after a slow-building accumulation of energies, or some traits in Immanuel Kant's ideas on the dynamic overflow in the experience of the sublime. The religious connection might have been a natural way to go with the theory for Abhinavagupta, following the local tantric Shaivism, where the material and organic world is loaded with divinity. There was no profane autonomic space for the arts to flourish on their own at the time. The state of culture, which we know came into birth following some arbitrary historical and institutional strains of development in post-Renaissance upper-class Central Europe. Abhinavagupta's entering into another world, in some measure a real one, and losing ourselves in it completely, became a key function in later Rasa theory. According to him, overcoming the ego is something Rasa does as well as evoking a religious experience. This is a remarkable win for the arts in classical Sanskrit philosophy. Emotion-wise, the aesthetic emotions overcome the everyday, ordinary emotions and produce a kind of a cooked meta-feeling, as Ryynänen Chakrabarti argues, with a distance towards the everyday. The list of the rasas is the following. These change a bit sometimes. Erotic, heroic, terror, disgust, humorous, compassion, wonder, dread. In Bharata's taxonomical system, rasas have certain stage colors, and the sage writes that the rasa is the cumulative result of stimulus, involuntary reaction, and voluntary reaction. Everyday emotions work like condiments and herbs, Bharata says, which render food tasty. Everyday emotions are material for the rasas, where they, as original ingredients of a hot sauce, are not individually felt or seen. The theatrical production is said to produce this juice, a sense, or aesthetic flavor, resulting in the atmospheric emotion. Just like a cook produces the taste of take for example, a pasta sauce with the help of an onion, garlic, and herbs, which altogether become one rich taste in the end. Situations with human focus, mimic changes, transcend emotions, and basic emotions come together to create a new flavor in a rasa, where you can no longer trace the original ingredients used. The flow of emotional, atmospheric, and uplifting, some describe this as a liquid overflow, impact makes the audience lose or forget themselves for a while, submerging in the world of the work of the play. Experience emotions that are not in a way their own, but coming from the estranged world of emotions, which is cut off from reality on stage. The audience should forget its history, place, and time for a while in order to reach a reflective second plane, where self-reflection and moral reflection gain new intensified heights. It is not about art's ability to raise literal meanings and metaphorical meanings, but that the suggestive quality of good art gains, mainly in this late Kashmiri interpretation, a special role. Once the imagination is stimulated, the parallel reality takes over. It is a world where, quoting Anandavarsana's Danyalaka, in the promise of poetry, obviously standards of truth and falsity have no relevance. End of quote. It is also a state for transition, where negative emotions and non-beautiful things can offer delight. What makes Abhinavagupta special is that he molds Rasa theory into a reader-audience-centered way of thinking. By adopting Bhattanayaka's interest in situations, how and where rasa exists, and noting the capable, trained audience, he turned the gaze from the manual-like writing which has started with Bharata's objectifying encyclopedism. According to Abhinavagupta, the heightened sense of pleasure is what drives us forward. The higher Shakti, the capacity of awareness of the self, expresses it, takes the experience from subjectivity, our everyday emotions, subjectivity, to objectivity that exists on stage, thus resembling German idealist notions of the absolute. We have already, I think, outlined the basic idea of the rasa. The long thread of theorists, questions and comments on a variety of issues, like if the poet actor needs to have the rasa inside him, if art can exist without rasa, if the artist needs to decide beforehand the rasa of the work, if rasa is always pleasurable, if extra rasa should be added to the list, like peaceful, and other areas of aesthetic theory are more to be discussed by the exegetic scholars of this tradition. Everyday emotions, the bhavas, anyway, form the base for this. This base is elevated and, phenomenologically speaking, like I said, reduced into another type of experience. Roughly speaking, we can talk about aesthetic experience. In the sophisticated manipulation of sight and hearing, the strongest of our senses, the play is able, here art beautifully becomes as strong as religion for the first time in Indian philosophy, is able to overcome our ego. Rasa theory is about artistic sublimation with a small spiritual spice. Well, one can discuss the spiritual here. One must bear in mind that the classics did not have a very autonomic or well-defined world of art at their hands, and religious philosophy was dominating all kinds of systematic thinking. This is not to say that there would not be something alike in religious worlds and artistically produced fictional worlds. We are anyway, through the rasa, pushed out from our basic everyday world into a parallel way of being, a parallel world. This heightened world and our elevated position in it is a reflective one which enables us to see things from a higher point of view, and a state where, for example, moral and plastic ugliness do not matter. We are in a way 2.0 for a while. Abhinavagupta talks about it like we would be entering into an other world, in some measure on a real one, and losing ourselves in it completely. End of quote. But with a long history of going into different types of performances, I'm quite sure that Abhinavagupta is coloring the issue a bit here. I like Chantal Maillard's pragmatic way of putting it. In Abhinavagupta's work, aesthetic emotions overcome everyday, ordinary emotions. Bharata himself writes that it is impossible to know all the dramatic arts, since there is no limit to emotions and no end to the arts involved. What could he have thought of our everyday stimulation? Well, one can of course say immediately that this heightening impact cannot be thought of in the way we use it when we talk about a well-written and well-performed classical drama, and then our everyday stimulation. It's not the same thing. On the other hand, when one thinks about it, after centuries, in India, thousands of years of highly developed drama, it is again in India where many of our global forms of media aesthetics are today born and developed. As India is one of the main developers of our digital and atmospheric mediatized life, maybe there even is a trace of the old Rasa thinking applied unconsciously or consciously by nerds in New Delhi, Mumbai, and Bengaluru. Bharata writes that Rasa is the cumulative result of stimulus, involuntary reaction and voluntary reaction. What if one thought of this above-mentioned example and reflected on the way we are all constantly marinated by atmospheric ambiences, which professionals trained in art and design schools have worked out for us? Isn't this capitalist, well-designed world a parallel world, one where we feel detached from real life, however complicated that might sound, real life, but I still like to keep some kind of a pragmatic distance to it. Again, just giving you some examples. I jump in my car and the soft audio signals keep manipulating me. I sit in the office and hear the background music floating from the nearby cafe. And I follow up the incredible performance of beautifully designed cars in traffic while a contemporary music piece flows through the radio. The mall is like a living organism with audio and visuals that wants me to feel upbeat and ready to consume. And the same goes for most of my digital environments. Maybe sometimes some office environments want me to feel effective and bright. In the end, the atmosphere where I am might not be anymore, like in the old Rasa theories, heroic nor sad, but definitely it does not often stem from me. I am here, sometimes my critical ego overcome, and often I feel like just a product myself, a product which echoes the atmospheric states produced for me. It is maybe not about connecting to the universal levels of consciousness imagined to be a part of the process of catching up with the rasas in the classical theories, but definitely in some weird, capitalist, contemporary sense, I feel often a bit uplifted by these half things, as Tonino Grifera calls atmospheres. And I do not experience often emotions of my own, but the ones produced by Indian nerds, American cinematographers, and Swedish pop musicians, ones which make it easier for me to buy chocolate or to just feel that my life is fine, or, to speak in Rasa terms, live through staged emotions. This global industry of atmospheres is often unnoticeable for us theorists, as we tend to look for works of something for our inquiries in aesthetics, cultural studies, and art theory. But it surrounds us nearly everywhere. Rasa theorists say that emotions gained from the stage are somewhat phenomenologically reduced, but interesting, the atmospheric structure, the aesthetic web which is woven around us, is phenomenologically strong, at the same time as the marinating effect of the rasas keep on staying quite on the backside of our experience. It is not that we'd come home and describe what we experienced in the mall, but that this endless, hardly notable rasification of our everyday is present without making much noise in our life. Here we part from the classics. One can hardly say that we become reflective on a higher stage. Abhinavagupta says that, I'm quoting, "Let us revert to the spectator. His own self continues to be merged in the represented exploits, and through it, he goes on seeing everything in this light. He sees as one," end of quote, "he sees as one interesting side of the rasas their way of staying with us, also after the intensified dramatic performances he's interested in. But what if we are all the time, most of the time at least, in this play where we are characters ourselves in a more shallow way? This is not a moment to raise awareness of the way G.T. Deshpande writes about the higher Shakti, the capacity of awareness of the self in connection to rasas, nor of the way the whole thread of thinkers involved with the rasas seem to talk about a kind of an absolute state reached through the rasa experience. The heights of art and popular culture are very different experiences. This is the moment to think if the best professionals around, who are getting well paid to just manipulate us a bit to be a bit upbeat, ready to consume, and to feel laid back, can be so good that they and their negative work on our senses should be taken seriously in aesthetics and philosophy of art. And if Rasa theory could help us to grab this weird phenomenon that surrounds us these days. Peter Sloterdijk talks about atmo-terror in his book Sphären. Why not take the atmo-terror, or Rasa terror, whether we like it or not, to be something which actually is a holistic Gesamtkunstwerk, constructed by an endless line of designers, nerds, and popular artists, quite many of them from India. If once the best professionals worked on drama, maybe they today work to make our everyday more aestheticized, fluent, comfortable, and nice. The spectacle of our everyday life, which capitalism needs to keep rolling, is a major life work for many. Also my students, I teach in an art and design school. And as the contemporary scholar Aridan Chakrabarti writes in the introductory chapter for his absolutely great and fresh-minded research handbook of Indian aesthetics and the philosophy of art, it is not so much beautiful or lovely, which the concept of rasa grasps, or the Indian concepts of beauty. Amazing and awesome express Indian aesthetic theories better. Sounds like today's capitalism to me. If mall background music is not the perfect object for some rasa theories, neither are highbrow drama, or for example, a Marcel Proust, anyway. Both aesthetically and politically, I think what really matters today in everyday aesthetics is the way we are softly manipulated throughout our lives. It might be that this, in the end, could also be one of the big political questions of our time. It is not just that pop music is, this we know, the soundtrack of our lives, but that we do not even encounter works of music or graphics anymore that often, just a steady flow of pleasant forms, fragments. It's like a river where we swim from our birth, a Hello Kitty lamp blinking in the ceiling when we are brought home, to our death, our funerals, this is something I've been going into lately, are more and more digitalized. And many of us hear background music or see the visuals of laptops or phones massaging our eyes when we take our last breath. From home, where my stepson's computer game gives the background music, I travel in my car, beeping softly to remind me to put on my belt, to my workplace, where ambient music flows from the cafe to remind me about the need to reread Bharata and Abhinavagupta. The Rasification of everyday was something the classics could not imagine, but their theories, for sure, I think, this brief theoretical sketch already maybe shows it, provide us hints on how we could possibly start framing our contemporary aestheticization with the help of their life work. There's no bliss that we will be getting, like they sometimes say they get from theater or performances. This is more sneaky. And where are we heading? What could be a good name for these forms of classification? Maybe I would go with the feeling of contemporaneity sometimes, as often we like to follow our time. I think the good discussion on contemporaneity and the experience of contemporaneity, sublime, global, all of us networked together, is definitely something that is accentuated in many of these digital environments where I work. Happy consumerism is one. I think safety and comfort is one. People like to feel safe and comforted when they consume things. So it would be great to be in the same physical space. I'm one of those people that come after talks and have a chat with other people and try to catch them up later on in bars and restaurants and so on. But the nice thing is that I will soon close my telephone and my computer and drive with my family up north, because more cabin weather is just snow and some forest. And maybe there's something personal in my talk and my interest in this topic of our stimulation, capitalist stimulation, aesthetic, sensual. As I really like to take breaks from it. But I think maybe many people in our business do that consciously. Thank you very much.